Beginner-friendly furniture flipping. In this video, I'm going to show you a simple flip that you can do on a free or inexpensive piece of furniture with minimal hands-on work time to turn a profit. This piece cost me $20 on Facebook Marketplace. It did have a failing finish on the top and there were some old sticker glue marks on the front, but all in all, apart from the aesthetics, it was in good shape. It had all of its handles, the drawers slid smoothly, and this is the perfect thing that you want to be looking for when you start out flipping furniture. Now, all good flips start with good preparation, and part of that is giving it a good clean. So you can see here that I'm removing all of the handles, and that's so that I can get in and underneath those handles where dust and debris likes to hide. You want to be very thorough in your cleaning step. You want to get underneath your piece. You want to get all around the legs and inside the actual body of the piece as well. Crud Cutter is a fantastic all-round cleaning product, but it's especially good on glue or anything that's sticky. I soaked these spots in Crud Cutter and then I simply used my carbide scraper and scraped off the excess of that glue. Once you have cleaned down with your cleaning product of choice, you need to go around with some hot water just to remove any residue that may be sitting on the surface from your cleaning products. Now, you're probably wondering at this point why you have to do so much cleaning prior to sanding down your piece. And the simple answer is that if you leave that dirt, grease and grime on the surface of your furniture, when you go to sand, you will drive that dirt, grease and grime further down into the piece. It will go further into the timber, which will then inhibit your primer, your paint, your finishes, polyurethanes, all of that from adhering to the surface effectively. Not to mention the fact that you will go through so many sanding discs because everything that's sitting on top of the surface will just gunk them up. And that's one thing that you have to take into account is your product usage. When you're flipping for profit, you have to minimize the amount of products that you're actually using. And sanding discs are expensive. So you only want to be using 1 or 2 on a project. You don't want to be using 10 because they've gunked up with gross stuff that was sitting on the surface that you could have just cleaned off in the beginning. Once everything is clean and dry, you can move on to sanding. Now, for this simple flip, we're only going to be sanding down the top of the piece to raw timber, and we're going to be scuff sanding the rest of the piece to prepare it for paint. I like to start sanding with 120 grit sandpaper. However, if you have a lot of scratches or dents, you can go down to 80 grit sandpaper to get those out. You wouldn't want to go any lower than 80 grit sandpaper though on a piece of furniture because the lower the grade of sandpaper, the coarser it is, and the more likely you are to leave micro scratches in the surface of your timber. You do want to make sure that you come back up the grades though. So say you start off with 80 grit sandpaper, you move to 120, followed by 150, and then you go up to 180 and 240. And you do this slowly so that if you have created any little micro scratches, you will actually sand them out as opposed to jumping from say an 80 grit sandpaper up to 240. That will just close down the scratch and it will still be present in the timber. If you come up slowly, you'll sand it out rather than closing it down. When I scuff sand, I use 120 grit sandpaper, and scuff sanding is basically creating micro texture or a key for your primer to adhere to. So you want to go around the entire piece and make sure there is no slick, shiny surfaces. And when it's all cleaned down from all of the dust, you want the surface to look milky. I highly recommend that if you are thinking of furniture flipping for profit that you invest in a spray gun. There's some very cheap and cheerful options out there. You get a beautiful factory finish and they save you a lot of time. It takes me around 5 minutes to put a coat of paint on a piece this size, and essentially time is money when you are flipping furniture. Because I'm going to be spraying this piece a darker color, I'm using Zinsser water-based primer, and I made a dedicated video to primers which you can find in my beginners tips playlist, which goes into priming in a little bit more detail. It just shares what you should be using for what application. So go and check that one out. If you are wanting to spray your piece a lighter color, say a white or a beige, I would highly recommend using a shellac-based primer so that you don't get any tannin bleed coming through from the timber. You can go through and tape off all of your drawers instead of using a piece of cardboard like I am doing here, but I just find personally that it's a very tedious process and it takes a lot of time to tape off all of the drawers, plus you're using a product that you can't reuse again. Whereas if you use a piece of cardboard like this, it works as a barrier to block any overspray going to the rest of the drawer, and it's something that you can reuse. To keep costs low on this flip, I'm going to be reusing the same handles, but I'm going to paint them first. But in order to paint metal, you need to prime it first. So this is using a product called Edge Primer, and it basically eats into the metal a little bit and mattifies it so that your paint will adhere properly. Prior to painting, I go around with 400 grit sandpaper across the entire piece and then remove all of the dust to ensure that I'm getting the smoothest finish possible. This is especially important if you're using a brush or a roller to apply as well, because those tools create a lot of texture and you can eliminate it and get the smoothest finish possible if you are sanding in between each coat. You can use a furniture specific paint to paint your pieces of furniture, or you can use a water-based enamel that is designed to go onto trims and around door frames, and it is sufficient for furniture as long as the surface has been prepared properly and it is sealed effectively. I like to do 2 coats of spray paint on my handles. Once these are completely dry, I flip them over and I do the underside in that second coat. Once your first coat of paint is dry on your piece, you want to come around with 400 grit sandpaper again and remove all of the dust, especially if you have sprayed outside, because bits and pieces float into the paintwork, little hairs, little specks of dust, and this just ensures that you have none of that texture and it will give you a really buttery smooth finish. In most cases, 2 coats of paint is going to be sufficient for your piece of furniture, but if you notice that it's a little bit patchy, don't worry, come back and do a 3rd coat. But keep in mind that if you are overlapping each of your sections with your spray gun, you're going to get a more consistent finish throughout your piece and you won't have to come back and do extra coats in the end. For this piece, I wanted a light driftwood tone on the top, and in order to achieve this, I'm going to add a paint wash. Now, paint washing is essentially using a watered down paint mix to tone the timber. So this is a step that you would do prior to sealing with a polyurethane or a wax. Paint washing is a fantastic technique to have in your repertoire if you are thinking about furniture flipping for profit, because you can really tailor your pieces to different aesthetics. And if you want to learn exactly how to do it, how to choose your colors, how to mix up, how to apply, and how to seal for longevity, then I have a beginner's guide through the link in my bio, which will teach you everything that you need to know step by step. You can see the difference here already, but I ended up applying 2 coats of this paint wash, sanding with 400 grit sandpaper in between each coat. You do want to make sure that you sand in between each of your paint wash coats, because anytime that you put water back onto your timber, you're going to be raising the grain and it will just smooth it back down. I like to use waxes to seal my pieces, whether they be a raw timber look or a painted piece, and this is using Fitty's Supreme Wax Polish in the color Light. It is a really easy wax to apply. It goes on matte but can be buffed out within a couple of minutes to a really beautiful sheen, and it does come in a range of colors. I applied 2 coats to the top of my piece and then 1 light coat to the painted sections. I then popped my hardware back onto the piece. And guys, this is the end result. It was 4 hours of hands-on work time to achieve this look. It was $20 to purchase initially, and I put around $15 worth of materials in. And I know at the moment in my area, I can sell this for between $280 to say $300, which I think is a fantastic return for my time. I highly recommend doing this as a side hustle. And if you want to learn a little bit more, head to the link in my bio, because I have some fantastic resources that can help you out on your flipping journey.